Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for December 23rd, 2014. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today we're joined by John Hogoboom, Matt Kaiser, and online Jim Clausing, and I'm Brian Rexroad. And today what we're going to do, being the last episode of the year, we're going to talk a little bit about our forecasts or predictions into 2015. I'm a little edgy about that whole notion about predictions because, you know, it kind of, I like the idea of talking about trends or forecasts, you know, something that has a little evidence that pushes along that way. But nevertheless, there are lots of organizations that are doing predictions. I think we have a little bit of our own slant here. And I think first what we're going to do is go over to John here. And John, what do you think is going to be the big thing on your mind for
Well, it's been the big thing on my mind for a long time, for several years now. And we're seeing some new trends in 2014. So basically, the topic I wanted to discuss is that the novelty of APT is lost, APT being advanced persistent threats. If you went back 5 years ago, probably not many people outside of certain parts of the industry and government and military knew what APT was or actually had it classified in that kind of terminology. You know, traditionally, I've always considered APT to be something that is targeted. So they're targeting specific organizations, usually specific individuals in that organization, and usually at the direction of a nation state. I would say maybe my definition is getting a little more loose.
It's getting
It's getting fuzzy. And the reason I say that is because we saw some interesting things this year. So not only did we see APT actors, so like in the dark hotel incident, there was certain tools that they used. Now, it was a very specific APT campaign. They would go to hotels. They knew when specific targets that they were interested in were going to check into that hotel, and then they modified the portal for the Wi-Fi at that hotel to deliver malware only to that person. So this is like super highly sophisticated targeting that they were doing. But that a lot of their tool sets that they were using also ended up kind of indiscriminately being distributed on peer-to-peer networks in various ways. And then on the flip side, we saw some of these malware actors that traditionally do just, you know, crimeware type things like Zeus and, you know, those actors started to use some of the techniques that APT actors use. So in 2014, we happened to see a particular group of Zeus actors, Zeus being a crimeware toolkit, using weaponized documents like Word documents and PowerPoints as a means to infect users, which was really, you know, prior to last year, the only people doing weaponized, you know, PowerPoints and Word docs were the APT actors that were, you know, the nation state guys going after intellectual property inside targeted things. You know, I guess the long story short, the lines have been fuzzing a lot. There's a lot more awareness now, maybe because those lines have been kind of getting more fuzzed. And we're also seeing, I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about was destructive APT. Thankfully, we haven't seen a lot of it, but we've seen some. And this is where some of my lines have gotten fuzzier. So we saw the Saudi Aramco event. I don't remember when that was.
2012.
Was it 2012? That was a destructive piece of APT. At the time when the Sony incident occurred, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to classify that as APT or not. I'm thinking maybe to them, certainly, it probably wasn't APT.
It's definitely targeted.
Right? It was very targeted, focused activity. It's hard to say whether it was nation-state oriented. Some people say yes, some people say no. But you know, hopefully the destructive types of malware that are, you know, really doing a lot of damage to companies is going to be less common. APTs in general that we've been watching over the past, you know, 10 years or so are really quiet. They get in. They steal intellectual property. They don't want to create a lot of noise. They want to get the information that they want and stay under the radar and stay in for a long time so that they can continue to gain intellectual, you know, strategic information out of that asset that they've, you know, targeted. So anyway.
I'd like to just get a little bit philosophical with you here. And, you know, one of the things, just your original point here, I think is very important to really pay attention to. That is this notion that the novelty of APT is lost. And it's almost to the point, and what I relate it to is that the whole notion of malware, that is, that have somebody infect your computer is really a crime. Yeah. And to get to the point where it's just kind of business as usual, you know, that people are willing to accept the fact that their computer's been infected and just, you know, whatever it takes to fix it and get it over with and be done. It doesn't get reported as a crime oftentimes, doesn't get investigated as a crime, not unless it's en masse or there's been significant damage. And it, you know, ultimately that's a resource issue, but to the extent that the APT is becoming so popular, you know, across, you know, lots of targets, lots of investment from whether it be crime groups or nation states, whatever it is, that it gets to the point where we accept it as a part of life, and that becomes a part of the problem. So I guess my fundamental message here is that despite the fact that the novelty is lost, it's not something we should, you know, grow to accept. We really have to resist that temptation to the extent that it's possible.
It's still very dangerous, especially, like I said, with the destructive stuff. But even still, the theft of intellectual property can destroy business and put it out of business just equally as well, but under the covers where nobody knows it until, you know, all is lost. We know certain companies, I'm not going to name names, that have gone out of business because they were targeted by a nation-state actor. Their intellectual property was stolen. It was reproduced in some foreign country.
Intellectual property case.
Yeah, that was just an intellectual property type thing.
Experienced destructive malware and other attributes. You know, I would almost split out another sort of prediction or trend along the lines of developing intolerance or concern about destructive malware. I think, you know, even before the Sony incident, we had been expecting, I had been personally expecting, and we've had a number of discussions about the notion of destructive malware becoming more and more of a threat. We've seen the lockers ransomware is becoming more sophisticated, more widespread, and you know, more real. They used to just threaten to lock up your computer or to do something. Now they were actually doing it and then expecting you to pay. And so as that grows from one angle, from a crime perspective, and then you see these other, you know, things that are really targeting businesses and trying to suppress them in a sense, that type of thing, again, it becomes, oh, well, it happened there, then maybe the acceptance of it happening somewhere else becomes more. And so we'd expect to see more of it. And I think there will be a growing, continuing growing, you know, there's a lot of talk about it, about a real growth and concern about how that might affect critical infrastructure, and then also building an intolerance of how that might impact the business and needing to address that. So, you know, things like making sure that all systems are backed up in a way that would be relatively impervious to that type of an attack, so that at least from a business continuity standpoint, be able to recover from things, an event like that very quickly, if not putting more effort into the prevention activities.
Right. You know, I read your note that the novelty of APT is lost, and I honestly thought the first thing was every single week, or maybe twice a week, maybe 3 times a week in my inbox, I'm getting information about some brand new APT campaign. Now maybe that's just over marketing or hype to take a small hacker group and turn them into APT. But, I mean, it seems like this is out of the bag now. Everyone knows it's going on.
Everybody wants to be in it.
Well, there's also a lot more threat intelligence sharing than there's ever been.
There is absolutely
Everybody and their brother
is...
it is good. But everybody and their brother is sharing their threat intelligence data, and it's to the point where it's like a fire hose being sprayed at you. You're like, okay, I got to pick the ones out here that I need to really pay attention to and try to, you know, defend against, because they are targeting, you know, the sector that I'm in.
Right. Well, and that's, I think, one of the valuable aspects of threat intelligence, that is not to treat everything as a flat thing, but to set your priorities on things that you really need to be paying attention to and concerned about. And that doesn't mean that it's going to prevent any surprises, but it will at least provide the opportunity to reduce the potential of surprise.
Yeah. And speaking of, I was just going to say, with your tolerance question, I think in general we want to be intolerant to any kind of malware on your devices. But with APT actors, because traditionally they've been very under the radar, yeah, they do some, they're not destructive, they're real quiet, they steal a couple of secrets of yours here and there, and certain businesses have accepted that as, okay, that's fine. But when these destructive events occur, I really think that it raises people's awareness to the point that, wow, we can't let something like this continue. We got to make sure we've got, our doors locked and only the right people can get in. So
yeah, good point. Any thoughts, Jim?
It can't be business as usual. We've got to remain diligent.
Yeah, raise the bar. Don't let it get lower. Get it up higher. So, Jim, what do you think is we should be looking forward to in the next year, or not looking forward to, whichever?
Well, I think we're going to see more and more of the mobile malware. We've had the last couple of years we've seen orders of magnitude increases on that, and I don't know whether we'll see several orders of magnitude increase this coming year, but everybody's got the mobile devices. They're becoming more powerful. The bigger processors, bigger memory. They can do more. So the bad guys are going to continue to target those. And I really think we're going to see some significant effort on the part of the bad guys to go after the iOS market. It's been, relatively little malware has targeted iOS because Apple keeps such tight controls on everything. But there are so many iOS devices out there now. The iPhone and the iPads are so popular that I think we're going to see more targeted efforts on the part of the bad guys to get in there, and whether it's more of the Java-based stuff that runs in the browser, that's also targeting them. But I think we'll see some efforts, and hopefully they won't be particularly successful, to come up with malware that slides by Apple and actually infects.
Right. Yeah, I think there's at least been evidence that there are vulnerabilities that could be exploited. No, hopefully not exploded, but certainly exploited in these devices. And as we progress forward, it's really a matter of time before somebody is motivated to the extent that they feel that they can and again, the complacency, the tolerance of things, not so much more of a complacency item that is, because I'm using an iOS device, I feel more comfortable. There's going to come to the point where somebody's going to take advantage of that and kind of surprise the world, I think.
Right, and we've talked about it before that because Apple so tightly controls the stuff in its app store, it has been difficult, but occasionally things slide through there. Usually they're caught quickly and removed, but that contributes to the complacency that you're talking about, and so I agree. I think somebody's going to really go after that, and I think that could happen this coming year.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a reasonable prediction. And I suspect it's not going to be through the App Store. A lot of what we've seen so far has been sort of through the App Store, but I think in most of the contests where they're trying to pwn devices, they're not using the App Store to do that. They're going through the web interface and hitting exploits associated with the browsers, or something along those lines. Or if they can spoof somebody into installing something outside of the market, I think that's really where they're going to really. That's the most likely path that I would expect to see.
And I think there's other vectors. I think first of all, I think Apple does a really good job at putting good security controls and monitoring around apps. But there are other methods. You don't have to necessarily do it through an app store. It could be that you tether your device to your computer and something crosses over. I know we've seen some things that try to do things in that nature. So there might be some more out-of-the-box thinking going on here. Certainly, there is a large number of devices that anybody would be, any criminal would be very interested in being able to, recruit into their botnet or their criminal enterprise, just like they do in the Android space currently. I would agree with Jim's point, and I think we've seen some things with OS X. In just the Mac space in general, there's a little bit more attention in the past year or two in getting malware onto those devices.
Yeah,
so, it's probably a trend that's going to continue into the mobile space as well.
I'd agree. So it's important to keep the ear to the ground looking for these types of activities. We've been paying attention to that here. Matt, what do you think?
Well, I've been thinking mostly in terms of the big hits of 2014 in terms of vulnerabilities, and those are the ones like Shell Shock, Heartbleed, Pool. These broad impact vulnerabilities that don't only just affect a single vendor or operating system, but affect a number of different platforms. Embedded devices, regular Linux, but even Windows in some cases for some of these packages if the things are configured that way, and appliances as well. I mean, I keep thinking back to the time we were going back and looking at Shell Shock and Heartbleed and how long it was taking. We've done everything we can. We have to wait on vendor X, Y, and Z, and it's that kind of thing where you feel like it's never going to get patched. And I'm sure that there are still vendors out there that haven't patched for some of these bugs, even with the incredible press that we've seen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, in fact, in some cases, they may not even be aware that the problem exists.
Sure. I mean, they may not know that that's the component inside their embedded device that they're relying upon. They just know that we've got SSL on here, and it does something. I feel like there's got to be more of these sorts of bugs out there. I mean, there's so much code inside of Linux that people take for granted that somebody has looked at. Although it seems like in these cases maybe somebody had, or someone introduced a bug 5 years ago, and we everyone sort of assumed they know what they're doing. Maybe they didn't make them. Some of these are completely legitimate mistakes, but even those can have wide-reaching impact. I feel like we're going to see a couple more of these in 2015.
Yeah, we had a speaker here at AT&T. I think it was last week, a representative from the Linux Foundation that was talking a little bit about this topic. He was talking more specifically about the OpenSSL issues and how. Previously in the development process, there weren't very many people that were actually reviewing the code before it actually got included as a release. And so what they were doing is trying to take what was done associated with the Linux kernel and trying to map that into processes for other things. And they're starting to incorporate more things into it. I didn't see Bash mentioned, but I certainly did see, OpenSSL is in there, network time protocol is in there, because we dealt with the reflection attack activities associated with the network time protocol, and so there are a considerable number of tools that are still out there that may need a stronger, development and review process to make sure that at least the changes have been checked for at least apparent or obvious issues associated with that. But I think, John, you were talking about earlier how, that Bash vulnerability was like weird and subtle, right?
Right.
And the little nuances, it's really difficult to pick up on all the little nuances that can pop in these things, and more devices, and I'll use the term devices, we talk about Internet of Things, more and more things are using software from ultimately what was the original, the same original code base, and it's spreading all over the place, and they may not even know what the origin was. Somebody pulled a piece of code from here, put it in there, and was using it, and they went off to another job, and somebody else comes in, they're picking up, oh, gee, I didn't know that was in there, right?
Or they're even using a reference implementation, which was the cause, I think, of the SNMP bug a while back, that parser bug.
Right, absolutely. And this goes back a number of years, where the first experience that I recall of having sort of a wide sweeping cross-vendor software bug was related to SNMP, where there was a parsing error that allowed some sort of a buffer overflow, and we had to go around to each of our network device vendors and each of the models and and all the different releases and apply patches associated with that. I'm going to take a guess that was back around 2008 or so, and but the experience is certainly clearly burned into my mind. And Dave Gross even more so, because I remember we were originally pondering how this was going to get managed as a patching process. And I guess as you're pointing out, we can probably expect to see a number of these repeats of these kinds of events going forward, and some challenges around doing good patching, or at least identifying the patches need to be made.
and having really good asset inventory really helps, because you know all of these cases, Heartbleed, Shellshock, Poodle. If you have good asset inventory, you know immediately which devices you're going to need to remediate. Although with Shellshock, I would argue that it was a little complicated.
It was a little complicated.
You know, there's a lot of things in there, but Heartbleed and Poodle were a little bit easier to, if you knew what version of various software you had, it was a little bit easier to track down whether or not you'd be impacted or not, or that device would be.
I guess to your point, you know, as we get more network connected devices that we don't think of as computers, they need to be included as the asset inventory as well.
Anything that gets an IP address needs to be in the asset inventory database.
And needs to be considered a computer. I think that's something we have to push to the consciousness as well, is that, you know, if you hook it up to the network,
it's a computer.
It's a computer.
Yeah, you need your thermostats, your refrigerators,
light bulbs,
phones.
Light bulbs,
It becomes a big data.
Your security system DVRs.
Absolutely.
Which we know is a big problem.
All right, very good. Thank you, Matt. I guess the next one I'll introduce here, and I think you know, it relates to the Internet of Things. You know, if you go out Christmas shopping, I think this is the season where it's network connected devices, and we have to be, you know, paying attention to the vulnerabilities that might be associated with those, the configuration management associated with those, the password protection. It really provides the opportunity for those that exploit these devices to recruit them into their botnet and to you know, make it a part of the you know, another set of problems, denial of service attacks, or you know, data theft, that sort of thing, avenues into networks. So now, on the one hand, I see it that way. On the other hand, you know, there are only certain devices that are really trying to connect to the internet. You know, we've talked about the security surveillance DVRs that, you know, basically intentionally expose themselves to the network, and we've talked about home routers that really are the edge of a network for most homes and you know, maybe very small businesses as well. So I don't know, is it going to be really a security issue, or?
I think it is. I think there's two reasons for this. The first is that, and I am constantly surprised at what people will connect to the open internet, even though it has no real good reason being there, either by physically connecting it directly on the outside of like a firewall, or punching a hole through some sort of port forwarding, because they think they need to have the access. They don't understand that you can do things like NAT, and there are other ways of getting to it. So that's one thing. And the second is that nothing prevents you from using another means of getting into that internal network. I mean, we've seen attacks where someone gets forced to go to a web page, the code inside that web page forces the browser to make a request to an internal IP address, 192.168.1.1, and try and log into your router's internal interface with a default password, and it works. So I think if people start having, if there's bigger market penetration of these devices, and you can sort of say, okay, you know, maybe 10% of the market is using a smart thermostat, is using some sort of home monitoring system, and you can reliably guess what IP address it's going to have, or even someone comes up with a tool that sits there and runs JavaScript that asks for a page at 192.168.1.1.2.3, and when it finds it and says, okay, I know what this is, and attacks it. You know, these aren't out of the realm of possibility.
From the inside, really.
From the inside,
yeah, it's
exactly.
Like drive-by farming type of thing, right? Where you have malicious JavaScript running in your browser.
Yeah, so it's a good point, I guess. So I was taking the approach that if it's isolated from the internet, if it's just your local network, then you can have a little more confidence in it. But you really have to be thinking about your local network from a security standpoint as well. And
yeah, well, and then you throw IPv6 into the mix.
Oh, absolutely.
When everything gets a public internet address.
Right, it's trying to break down, it kind of breaks down the notion of a firewall in some respects.
Although it makes the address space you have to search bigger, so that helps.
Yeah, certainly from a scanning point of view, and that's, I think the jury's still out on that topic in some regards, because eventually you get so many devices out there that are doing the scanning, you could potentially, you know, they're able to scan the entire 4 billion addresses in a matter of an hour. So as the botnet scales up, as more devices are out there, if you have 1 billion devices scanning the internet, your probability of finding something is going to go up, you know, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Still a lot of addresses, but it gets carved down a little bit. So a good point.
I would say a good holiday, New Year's Day tradition, go get an inventory of your home devices. Go log in, see if there's any new firmware available for them, and update your home devices. Because that's the big problem. I think a lot of these days is people get appliances, they buy them, they drop them on the network, they assume it's just there, it runs, and I would have no idea if I was not in the security field. Mm-hmm. I have no idea if there's some new firmware out that patches a critical vulnerability that allows somebody to remotely access my device.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a good point, John. The first thing I do when I open it up and out of the box and connect, you get a new toy, you want to play with it for a while. Well, one aspect of the playing is to go to the website, see what patches are available, what the patch process is, and things like that. I'd prefer that it actually be right on the box. That is, before you buy something, to basically make that an advertisement aspect of it. Is that this has patches available here. I think that's a part of what should be a selling point of products, that we provide a good security structure and a support structure around the device that you're buying. Because all too often, you buy something and look at it, and you wonder if it's going to work. The little one-page instruction thing, it doesn't help much.
I was going to say the first thing I do when I get a new toy out of the box is I hook it up to my packet capture network and I start listening.
Ah, good.
Run Nmap against it.
And run Nmap against it. It has an internet interface. What is it doing?
Yeah.
I know that most people probably won't do that, but it's a good exercise.
Well, for anybody that they think is so inclined, I think there's a business opportunity there to actually. For example, to my knowledge, I have not seen Consumer Reports, for example, taking internet-connected devices and going out and doing security tests on them and then publishing the results and saying, this one's better than that one in that regard. So, perhaps we have a little idea we can share with them.
I would like to see a better, I think we talked about this, a better patch management.
Yeah,
almost
absolutely.
like a federated patch management, something that everybody uses a common infrastructure, and I can, register my device, mm-hmm. and they'll send me emails and let me know.
Actually, literally, effectively,
let me know that there's a patch available, so I can update it.
That's not a bad feature to have for a device on its own. Is if you're setting it up for the very first time, include an email address, mm-hmm. and if things happen that the device is aware of but it can't take action on its own, email the owner and say, "Hey, this is your router. Just saying, I'd like to be patched now."
Right.
A lot of good ideas here. Maybe we should collect this into a little book or something.
Things we'd like to see implemented in 2015.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that's our show for today. If you'd like to, first of all, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, please email us at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. Maybe there is a prediction that you have that we didn't describe. Obviously, we haven't covered the entire realm of things, but if you think there's something really important that we need to cover, let us know, and maybe we can share it on the program here. Or if you think we got it plain wrong, I'm happy to hear from you on that topic as well. You can find us, that is the ThreatTraq program, on the ATT Tech channel. It's at att.com/ThreatTraq. That's with a Q instead of a CK at the end. We're available on YouTube as well as on iTunes, and you can follow us on Twitter at the handle @ATTSecurity. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, John. And thank you, Jim, for all your predictions. And I'm Brian Rexroad. We'll be back after the new year with a new episode. And until then, keep your network safe.